fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Diverse Stars podcast, third season. All my loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. This is an amazing episode because Erica Schultz returns from the mothership to discuss Rat City, part of the Spawn universe. Now come aboard as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Miss Schultz. Thank you so much for coming to Diverse Stars podcast.
Thank you for having me again.
It's totally my pleasure having you back. Like I said, the last time we spoke, we've definitely talked about Hollow Z. We talked about your Kickstarter. So I'm very excited to talk about Rat City with you, which is, like I said, big Spawn fan. So this is a big deal for me. So thank you so much.
Yeah, it's really exciting. I'm a fan of Spawn and obviously Todd McFarlane's work anyway. But to be able to contribute to the Spawn universe is pretty amazing.
Now, one of the big pieces of news about this is that you're the first female writer for any Spawn book. Now, there's 4 Spawn books now. Used to be also Curse of Spawn back in the day, but first female writer of all time for Spawn. What is that like? Is that a little pressure there?
In all honesty, I never set out to be a good female writer. I always set out to be a good writer. But I understand like the sort of novelty and marketability of it. But I just want to do what I do on every book, which is just tell a really good story. And in Rat City, J. Carlos and I are telling the story of Peter Cairn, who similarly, like Al Simmons, is a soldier. Well, Al Simmons was Marine, and although Peter is not dead, so Peter becomes a hellspawn basically from the God bomb that Al detonates in 300 and 301. That the necroplasmic detonation goes across time space and affects not just the past, but also the future, because the story, when we're in the present in the story, it's 2111. So we're about 90 years, give or take, into the future.
Now, this is going to be the 5th Spawn title to be per month. I assume this is ongoing, not a miniseries, or is this a miniseries?
Oh no, this is an ongoing. This is it was said to me that Todd wants at least 30 issues out of me. So so no pressure there.
So when you have basically 5 titles existing at one time, how tight is the continuity between all 5 titles? Are you guys sitting down and discussing where you're going? Are the interlocking, even though this is far in the future?
As of right now, the first 2 story arcs that we're doing, which are going to be 6 issues apiece, the first 2 story arcs right now for Rat City are self-contained. And in terms of how Jay and I have things planned, after the second story arc, we have ideas of where we want to go with it, but things are a little more open-ended. We've discussed, the idea of bringing someone forward in time, bringing Peter, our protagonist, back in time. We've had those discussions, but it hasn't been anything solid. And I think because Peter is not dead, I think that sort of limits what we can do. Like Gunslinger can bounce through time. Al has gone and bounced through time. We have Medieval Spawn, which Liam Sharp is doing, which is just, if you were at New York Comic Con and you saw some of the work, it's just stunning. So because Peter doesn't have that same, Peter doesn't have a necroplasmic suit. His suit is actually nanites. So Peter doesn't have that same link to the past or to the ability to move in time. But we have talked about it and just discussed it narratively.
Now, the first issue of Rat City is going to come out after the big Spawn 350 issue.
Yes.
Now, obviously, Spawn 350 comes out Wednesday. Now, is this tied to the events of that as well, or is it just 300 that is connected to 350 and that impact is not connected to?
I don't think I can say.
Okay.
Just because it hasn't come out yet. I don't think I can say whether or not it is. I will say that the biggest link is 300 301. That is the biggest link. And whether or not there may or may not be a link to 350 is to be determined.
Okay.
let's just put it that way. It's to be determined. I'm trying to stay out of trouble.
No, good. I had to see the news article. Miss Schultz gets fired because of our
Oh
interview
God,
with random
please no. I
podcaster.
just finished the outline for issue 8 this morning. Please don't fire me. Yeah.
So the other thing that's kind of interesting too is that even though you, like I said, you can't go back in time, Peter. However, for the most part, for intents purposes, spawns are pretty much immortal. So there's any character from Spawn is potentially still alive in this future. Is that correct or incorrect?
No, you can say that. I mean, we, like I said, after the second arc, we have some stuff that is pretty open-ended. But we will be bringing little things in, whether it's a quick homage or whether it's a character from Al's past that comes to the future, because there are some characters that Al had in his sort of group of friends in Rat City when it was called Rat City for, in Al's time, that, you know, I hope I'm not spoiling anything about Bootsy and Bobby. But you know, there are some people amongst them that aren't exactly human and that can move through time and are immortal. Bootsy Bobby, you know. Um, so I mean, there could be moments like that. There is an issue that I've written that when I sent it to Thomas Healy, the editor-in-chief, he was reading it and he was like, where did this come from? And I explained the whole thing, and he was like, okay, it works. And so I think that people are going to be surprised, and I think that they're going to be I think that it's a Spawn book, but it's not a Spawn book, but it's still a Spawn book. You know, I've made it sure, and Jay, especially with his phenomenal designs and phenomenal artwork, we've made sure that the Spawn fans have something to love.
Mm.
You know, there is something very, you know, very Spawn about this. However, there are aspects of the story that are not out of place in the Spawn universe, but just haven't been touched on before. And because of that, we're hoping that more fans, whether they're fans of my work, fans of Jay's work, fans of sci-fi and cyberpunk and things like that, we're hoping that they come along for the ride too.
Now, as part of the Spawn history, even though things change a little bit with Spawn 100, is that every era had a Spawn.
Mhm.
My
It
Bulger,
was every 400 years, I believe.
every 400. Okay, so
Yeah.
every 400 years, even though he's technically not a Spawn, is he kind of like the Spawn of his era? Is there then another Spawn that or that would exist in that era because he's not technically Spawn?
Well, it's not 400 years from
Oh,
1993.
good. Sure, the math is.
So that Spawn, I mean, because I know that they sort of fudged the numbers, but Cogliostro was from the 1500s.
Yeah,
So, and then it's supposed to be, I think at one point it said every 200 years, and then another time it said every 400 years. Because then you get Cog, and then you get Gunslinger, and
right.
then you get Al. So you can sort of fudge the timeline, but even if you went with the 200 years, it's not 200 years into the future. It's only about, I think, 93. When I first started writing it, it was like 91, but I mean, now that it's coming out, it's like 92, 93 years into the future. So it's not that length of time yet. So Peter can't be considered the Spawn yet, but we kind of have another name for him. We nobody's calling him Spawn. They're simply referring to him by this other name.
So one thing about, as you mentioned, the character is that basically for those who don't know, Spawn lets off a necroplasmic bomb issue around issue 300 that goes through across space and time. Though Spawn Al doesn't quite realize that's going to be the effect of all that.
Yeah.
Peter Kern, who was a soldier, has a prosthetic leg. The prosthetic leg is recreated using nanites. The nanites are infected with the necroplasm.
Yeah, when Al detonates the bomb, it basically sends this huge wave of energy. And think about who was there when the detonation happened. You had Al, you had Violator, and you had a representative from heaven. So basically, you have heaven, hell, and you have spawn energy. And we all know that Al's spawn energy is different from any other spawn that has ever existed. And that all of that energy coming together just went whoosh, and just this huge energy wave went across space-time, went across every world that you could possibly think of. If you want to think about it in terms of like multiversal, because I know everybody like talks about multiverse and stuff like that. If you want to think about it in terms of a multiverse, it has gone across everything. It has affected absolutely everything, every timeline, everything. And that's where a lot of these new stories are coming out of. So Peter is going on with his life, and there is this enormous blackout that basically just everything goes dark, and everybody starts losing their mind for a little bit. And he doesn't understand why everybody's going like everybody's a little crazy. But once he gets through it, and he, his whole thing is, I just want to get home. I was at work, this crazy thing happened, I just got to get home. And the way he gets home, he sees some things, he sees the way people are acting, and things aren't exactly lining up. And when he finally gets home, it hits him what really happened. And it's only kind of what really happened, because we sort of tease out the mystery of what actually caused the blackout. There's another character who sort of presents evidence that it was them that caused the blackout, but they didn't. And so like there's a whole lot, there's like a mystery, there's evil corporations, there's badass soldiers, there's cool techie stuff, there's a lot going on.
Now, to okay, for the most part, Spawn. Once again, going back, obviously he's not really a Spawn for different reasons. Of he's not dead and stuff like that. But for the most part, one thing that connects all Spawns is that at some point they died, they went to hell because they were in life, some part of their life bad, or they did bad things in life. That's where the necroplasm attaches to him. Peter Kern is not dead. It's not really necroplasm, but it attaches to the nanites on his leg. Does that mean Peter Kern isn't necessarily a bad guy?
Well, he's a soldier who's done bad things, but it's that idea of when you're a soldier, it's not murder.
Hmm.
You know, he has been influenced by he has a lot that has gone on in his life, and um he doesn't regret his service, but there are some things that he does regret. He doesn't regret his service as a whole, but there
Right.
are some specific operations that he definitely does regret. Obviously the one that took his legs.
So, oh, go
Yeah.
ahead. Sorry.
No, it's okay.
So, because once again he's neither dead nor necessarily a being who is hell future, future going to go to hell, hell destined. What does that say from about his power level? Does that lessen his power level, or how well the necroplasm will work within the nanites?
Well,
How's it going?
that's the thing, is he doesn't have necroplasm.
Okay.
That's so Al has a specific like a specific power source, and he like almost like a Green Lantern ring. And when that power runs out, he's screwed. And that's what that sort of clock,
Hmm.
the countdown was. Peter, when the energy wave causes this blackout, the energy wave will infect Peter's nanites. So Peter's suit is not necroplasmic. It is strictly nanites. And the only reason why it becomes this spawn suit is because the nanites have been influenced by the necroplasmic energy that has been, shot out all over the place because of Al's actions in 300-301. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I know it's very comic book logic.
No, it works. I mean, like I said, I mean, at the end of the day, as long as the book's good, I don't care how it all happens.
It's
But
like blah, 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 science, 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 comics.
right. I mean, it sounds it's very cool. Now a lot of the suit is also often depicted as being basically sentient, or the nanites also somewhat sentient, or no?
The nanites make decisions that Peter doesn't always agree with, but he understands that the nanites work on instinct. So if you've ever been in a fight or flight situation, if you weren't in that situation, you had time to sit down and analyze things, you might make a different decision versus you have a split second to make a decision. So the nanites sort of act on Peter's instincts. And sometimes they act on his baser instincts because this is a soldier. This is someone who has been trained, who has been at war. And sometimes instincts like that, Peter wants to forget he even has. And so sometimes those instincts run counter to what Peter would have wanted. If it's just, let's get out of Dodge, that's one thing. But the other times there are, oh, whoa, I wouldn't have reacted that way. And the nanites are kind of like, but would you have? You know what I mean? Like we know your history. We know what you've done. We know what's inside of you, what's in your DNA. And that's part of basically the whole thing is like Al, the necroplasm and Al's suit and his mastery of his suit. And remember, I mean, way, way, way early, Violator says, you shouldn't be, your suit should not be this strong this quickly. Like, what is it about you, Al Simmons, And I think that that's something that people sort of forget, this idea that like Al sort of leveled up way before anybody thought he would because he's Al Simmons, because there's, I mean, a version of midichlorians or whatever you want to say kind of thing is in Al. Like, what is it? Is it his love? Is it his emotions? Is it his DNA? Is it something spiritual? Is it something demonic? What is it? But there's something about Al Simmons that had him level up way before he should have. Because in one of those fights with Violator, back in like, I don't know, maybe 28, 29, and I'm probably it's probably closer to the 30s because I know Violator was still, messing around with Jason Lynn and everything. But basically, he's like, whoa, like you shouldn't be able to do this yet, buddy. So whatever it is that made Al special, well, a little bit of that got shot out to everywhere. And I will say this, it's not just Peter who's changed by this.
Okay. You see, I was just about to ask you, I was like, well, I'm sure he's not the only one with nanite body parts. He's not the only one who was in the area. So why does he have the power when someone else does it? What is special about Peter that makes it, or is it just random dumb luck that he ends up with the power?
Well, I can't say that I can't tell you.
but there's definitely a reason though. It's not random.
No, there is a reason behind it. I just can't tell you because that's part of the mystery that we're teasing out throughout the story. Why was it Peter? Like, what is it about Peter that made Peter? Well, just like what was it about Al that made Al special? What is it about Peter that makes Peter special? So I can't tell you yet. Sorry. No, you're just gonna have to read it. Sorry.
I'm gonna try to be patient.
I'm sorry. No, it's written. I mean, I have, in terms of scripts, I have full scripts done for up to issue 7. I have issues 8 through 12 outlined, loose outlined. I have 13 to 18. A loose outline was what's going to happen to that arc. I have 18 to 24, a loose outline, what's going to happen to that arc. Like I said, my minimum is 30. So that last arc is, I don't have everything all worked out yet. Jay and I haven't sat down and had everything worked out yet. So maybe that last arc, we go back in time or we pull somebody to the future. We don't know yet.
So the other cool thing with the character, as you said, he being a soldier and things he's done in the past. So how soon will we get that backstory about him? And is it difficult to write a backstory that is both wrong word might be horrible, but obviously Spawnish. At the same time, you don't want to lose the compassion for the character. I mean, this sort of line what he can do that's so bad that people are like, "Oh Jesus," but also bad enough that you think, "Okay, I got he's definitely a soldier who's done some bad things." So like, how do you write that line?
Well, off the first page, we see them on an op. The first page. So the opening of the book. Originally, when I had written the first issue, I had written it. Excuse me. I had written it where we already saw Peter as Spawn. Peter had the outfit. It was, raining on a rooftop, like very like Daredevil, Frank Miller kind of thing. And I wrote the first issue, and Thomas came back and said, because he's different, let's do like a pure origin, because he is different. We want there to be a link with Al, but we don't want it to be like we're repeating Al's story. So I was like, all right. So the first page, so I went back and I reworked it. And the first page of issue number 1 is you see Peter with his team on an op. So we automatically see him as a soldier. But we also see that, yeah, he's going to do some crazy stuff as a soldier. But we also see a compassion with him. And each one of the people in his unit have some characterization. And there's one person in his unit who's very close to a man named Reese, who happens to be the commander of the unit. And Reese is like a big brother to him. And Reese is very important to him when they are at war, and very important to him after they get out of the service. And everybody sort of has their own little, I guess their own little mantra. Like the mantra of their unit is adapt or die. Like that is the mantra for their unit. And Reese is the type of person where if you have any one of these people in your life where if you don't answer the phone or you don't answer text or whatever, and they get worried, within 3 hours, you'll have a knock on your door. That's Reese. If he doesn't hear from you, he will come out looking for you. And when you're in a battlefield, that's actually a really good thing to have. But when you're trying to live your life and somebody's knocking at your door, hey man, you haven't returned my phone calls. What's wrong with you? But Reese is definitely his big brother figure. And we're going to learn more about Peter and why he went into the service. And we're going to learn more about his family. And there's a lot. I'm actually thinking like for that 5th arc, I'm wondering if we should just do like just a full deep dive into Peter's family, because we're sort of sprinkling little things along the way. But yeah, it would be cool to do a whole deep dive on Peter's family life and everything. And, because you always think that these characters come from this like horrible, terrible, abusive family. But what happens if they don't? And what happens if, their dad's an engineer and their mom's a professor, and, they're just nice people who just want the best for their kids.
Now that when you mentioned the thing with the knocking, so we talking that he's the one who's suffering from PTSD currently.
They all are. They're all suffering from PTSD, and we'll see. So there's the PTSD that they suffer from as soldiers, but then there's sort of I'm trying to think of how to say it. There's almost like a mass PTSD from the blackout event itself. So there are people that the blackout has affected, not the same way that Peter has been affected, but there are people that are affected by the blackout itself. And they're affected physically. They're also affected emotionally by it. So there's a lot of healing, and there's a lot of hurt in sort of just always in the background. And, Peter loses someone very close to him, and that person, Peter then becomes sort of like the Reese figure, becoming the person who has to start taking care of people. And he sort of looks to the example that Reese gave him of being the sort of that big brother. Peter then has to step up and be that big brother. And not only does he have to do that, but he now has this incredible power that he doesn't completely understand. He knows that it runs on instinct. He knows that it sort of, does what it's supposed to do, or what he sort of thinks, but he's not very conscious of it. It's very reflexive. And because of that, like we said, sometimes, your reflex isn't exactly, appropriate for the situation. And so he's sort of dealing with this and learning about it, and figuring out, while trying to be a big brother, for lack of a better term, and while trying to sort of take Reese's place in a situation.
Now, this kind of an interesting thing is thinking about the Spawn verse. Um, unlike Batman in the DC universe, where if you live in Gotham City, you know Batman. Everyone knows there's a
Yes.
character, a guy named Batman running around doing things. It's not always clear how aware the world is of what Spawn does in the Spawn's titles. When we get to Peter, how aware are they of what's been going on through the history of the Spawns and the Angels and all the fighting that's been going on and all this other stuff?
I don't think how I can answer this. Okay. So in in Al's Spawn, like Spawn Prime, for lack of a better term, everything is anchored with not necessarily religion, but with a faith.
Hmm.
That doesn't exist. We're not talking about heaven and hell here. We're not talking about angels and demons here. Um, if anything, the angels and demons are, good people and shitty people.
Hmm. The,
So the whole religious God, that we don't get into that, or at least not yet.
what would Peter have the knowledge of spawns having existed in the past from
No,
just normal? The world kind of just has an understanding that these things were around.
nope. He
Okay.
has no idea what's happening to him. There's no frame of reference for him. And he has no idea who Al Simmons is. I mean, we have shown some artwork where Peter sees a vision of Al Simmons, but he has no clue what it means. He has no clue who he is. He knows none of that. It's just this really weird vision that he has after the blackout. And that's part of the mystery for Peter. I mean, we as readers who are familiar with Spawn know, oh, that's Al Simmons.
Hmm.
But the part of the mystery for Peter is, who is this person that I see in this vision? Why I know that the way they are dressed is similar to how I'm dressed when the nanites take over. What is the connection? What is the link? And that's sort of the mystery for Peter himself to try and figure out, even though we as readers who are familiar with the universe understand that this is Al Simmons. He was the spawn of, the 1990s, and his actions in 300 and 301 have caused the sort of turmoil. That's the inciting incident, if you want to call it that. Al, blowing up an angel and a demon and himself, basically.
You
So,
know, I think what I like about the idea of the title, there's an aspect of it that reminds me of I don't know, Kyle Rayner in the Green Lantern when he first appeared, where the story arc, a lot of it was Kyle Rayner was trying to understand what the Green Lanterns were, but as a reader, as someone who loved Green Lantern, I was like, you can always like yelling at the comic book, you're like, this is what you're talking about, this is what you're trying to figure out, and as a reader for Spawn, I feel like you're kind of doing the same thing with Peter King. As the fan of Spawn, the answer to the questions he's asking, and you kind of like want to shout at the comic book, no, this is what's happening, man. It's kind of like the same kind of fun.
but that's the fun of it, is the journey, is experiencing the journey with Peter. And I think that we can all turn around and say, oh, well, if this was the situation that I was in, I would react like this.
Hmm.
But you don't know that. And experiencing this newness with Peter is going to be part of is really part of what's, I think, interesting, because we saw Al and we saw how he did not deal with this well. And also, I mean, Al's motivation was something totally different. I mean, Al came back 5 years later because it was for love.
Yeah.
And, Todd has even said, like, I wanted to write a love story. And that's, Al came back for Wanda for love. Whereas Peter doesn't have that. That was never Peter's motivation, because Peter wasn't coming back from anything.
Hmm.
Peter's just trying to live his life, and all of a sudden this was thrust upon him, you know. And it's not something he can get rid of. It's not something he can literally wash his hands at.
Now, one thing as well is Al Simmons when he was learning his powers, he also had Cagliostro, who kind of was also a guide. Does Peter have any version of that to help him figure out
Nope.
what else happening to
The only thing he has is the visions of this weird dude
him?
that he has no idea. He has Peter. The only other thing is that if you think about the way the suit itself is constructed, so Cog helped Al because they both had their own version of the suit. Cog had the same necroplasmic costume as Al did. However, there's nobody like that in 2111. There's nobody like that Peter knows of, and that Peter can make contact with, who's in the same situation as him, or who has had 400 years to figure it out, like Cog has. The only reason why Cog presents himself the way he presents himself is because he has manipulated the necroplasm to create this presentation. Just like when Al tries to present himself as human, he comes off as a blonde white guy. So, because that's the way the suit interprets, because at the time, and this is, way back in like, 8, 12, when he goes and he visits Wanda, and he sees the dog, and the dog, and they even did that in the film. But he goes and sees Wanda, and he is a white dude. And he even makes a comment about like, why can't I make it look like me? Because he doesn't have the skill yet to be able to manipulate the necroplasm to create whatever it is he wants to create. Whereas Cog shows up in that weird outfit with the big, flowing hat, and he looks like, somebody from the Three Musketeers, minus the feather. But that's that's Cog's base of knowledge. That's what he wants to look like. And that's how he's learned to be able to manipulate the necroplasm to create this view for other people.
Now, as we said a few times, obviously Al doesn't know that his actions create Peter. From what we know of Al, what we know of Peter, would Al be happy that someone like Peter became a Spawnish type character, or no, being what we know of the characters?
I think Al would be happy that Peter became this type of character, considering the fact that Al, for a while now has been recruiting people for the final battle. So I think that Al would probably be like, good, another soldier, another person who can handle themselves, knows what they're doing. This is good, But I think Peter's had not such a great run as a soldier. And I'm not going to say that he becomes a pacifist, but he certainly has this I'm not going to kill for anybody ever again kind of attitude. Whereas Al, despite, everything that happened with Wynn, Al still has this, screw it, I'll kill anybody mercenary attitude. Whereas I think that's another thing, is that like, even after his military service, Al was still mercenary. I mean, he was a sanctioned mercenary. He wasn't like a Mark Spector, Raoul Bushman kind of character. I know I'm jumping to Marvel versus, Spawn, but you know what I'm trying to say. Yeah. Like he wasn't, just like a gun for hire kind of thing. But Al did, he still killed people for money. I mean, that's what he was doing. I mean, that's basically how he got set up by Wynn. Whereas Peter's career in the military was cut short by the accident that takes his legs. And he doesn't want anything to do with it after that. He doesn't want anything to do with the military after that. And so it's this weird paradox for him, because when he first joined the military, and this is something that we're going to expand on later on, but when he first joined the military, to him, it was this idea of belonging, and it was this sense of like pride for him. And then when he's discarded is probably the wrong word, but when he's injured and he's just like, all right, fine, we're through with you. You served your country. Thanks so much. Here's some, crazy funky legs. Peace out, brother. Um, when that happens, he's just kind of like it leaves a bitter taste in his mouth. And I sort of based some of that. I mean, my father and my grandfather were veterans of the army, and I based that on, my grandfather, when he came back from World War II, literally they made a parade. They got a parade. Whereas when my father came back from Vietnam,
Yeah.
He, not him personally, but many soldiers were literally getting spit on.
Yeah.
So this idea of the disposability of people, and you've outlived your usefulness to us, and that's something that Peter definitely deals with, whereas Al doesn't have that. I don't think Al feels that, and I think that Al just he just has a chip on his shoulder, that after Win and everything, and after he finds out exactly what happened to him, and how he was actually killed, once that mystery is revealed to him, then his whole thing is, I'm just going on the offensive.
Hmm.
So I think that Al would be proud to have Peter, but I think Peter's like, I don't want any part of this.
Hmm. Now, another
You're,
part.
you and your crazy war, kind of thing.
Well, I mean, one part that's true too of every Spawn book is that they are so visually strong, and the artist behind the book is Zay Carlos, correct? Am I saying it right?
J Carlos, yeah.
Zay Carlos.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean from a writer, from a visual standpoint, to have Zay Carlos on the book? How are you making this book feel distinct from visually, maybe from some of the other books, and how you're describing what you want to see?
When Jay and I first got together, what we talked about was, we talked about um Blade Runner, we talked about cyberpunk, we talked about there was a book that I had written with Van Jensen, and worked with Anike, phenomenal Spanish artist, called Bylines and Blood, and we talked about, because that takes place in the near future, in about 2050. We talked about bylines, and we wanted to show a world that was sort of, if you take the path that we're taking now in a general sense,
Hmm.
let's go down the worst possible route. The world is, when you see New York City, everything on the first 3 or 4 floors is just disgusting. It is dirty. It is derelict. There is graffiti everywhere, which I don't think graffiti is disgusting. I actually think graffiti is amazing, because it's a art form, and it's a form of rebellion against society. So I think that it's very cool, and there's a lot of very cool graffiti that Jay has put in it. But basically, the haves and the have-nots, the haves don't even touch, their feet don't even touch the ground.
Hmm.
They're in these very high towers that take air taxis left, from one place to another, and they don't even come to ground level. And you see everything on the ground level has this patina on it of just age and rust and decay. And then when you get into these towers and you go up the floors, everything has such a cleanliness, it's a sterility to it.
Hmm.
And the contrast between that is just crazy. I mean, even with Peter's prosthetics, when you see his legs, versus some of these other people who have not prosthetics that they need, but enhancements that they have chosen to get. They are shiny and clean, whereas Peter's legs are, after a while, they're not super shiny and clean anymore. No, they're now, you know, broken down. He has trouble with them. Sometimes they lock up on him. It affects his work. all these other things. And there is a huge chasm between these two types of people. And it is not, we don't discuss it in terms of a race, we discuss it in terms of social class. Because when the blackout comes, everybody who's on the ground floor basically is going a little nuts. Whereas the people who are up in the gilded towers, they're like, okay, well, we're still safe up here. Like they can't get to us. And it's very much of like they, them, those kind of dirty, disgusting people. They can't get to us. And we see a lot of, in terms of the environment, Jay has just built in, walking down the street, you'll see cars that are, stripped, or you'll see, like I said, the graffiti everywhere. And it's just like this constant feeling of rebellion, but no place to go.
It just sounds awesome. Like I can't wait for this book. And so we're talking a wait till April. Am I correct on this?
Yes, April. Let me just double check on my calendar. It is April 10th.
April 10th.
Yes.
That's a hell of a long
Sorry. I'm sorry.
But like I said, the book just sounds fantastic, and I'm looking forward to it. Come back on and talk about it, okay?
Thank you so much.
Have a fantastic day. Night. Thank you for listening to another episode of the Diverse Stars podcast. Please help me better the algorithms by liking and subscribing. Be sure to return for the next episode when Gabriel Ruiz of Star Trek Lower Decks boards the mothership. Until next voyage, travel on.